Thank you very much, Robin, and welcome everybody who was able to make it here live today, and to people who are watching it in the future. Hello, inhabitants of the future. We're going to get started right away, and first of all, I want to get to know you and what you're here for a little bit. So if you could just comment in the chat box, who do you teach, and why do you care about PBL culture? Outstanding. Yes, PBL learners get to be hands-on, right? They get to actually learn by doing. That's the key to it all, and it's maybe a little bit different than what we have done in the classroom in the past or what we grew up with ourselves. And so thinking about the culture that's really conducive to great PBL experiences is extremely important. So let's dive in and investigate. My first point that I'd like to make is that the culture of the classroom is a lot like the culture that you use to grow bacteria. Kids are an awful lot like bacteria, as you well know. And the conditions that you establish determine what kind of growth you're going to see. And so if we want to really allow for a flourishing PBL culture, let's think about bacterial culture. If we're going to grow outstanding bacteria, we need an environment that's warm, that's wet, and that's nutritious. It's full of nutrition for those little bacteria. We can draw an analogy to PBL culture. The warmth that we're going to provide is the warmth of passion. We're going to talk about different types of passion that you need to infuse into your classroom in order to develop that positive PBL culture. For wetness, we're going to think about getting messy, getting sloppy, and being open to failure. It's so important that we allow our students to have a mentality that views failure as a growth opportunity. And last, the nutrition of PBL is connection, collaboration, sharing. So we're going to talk about strategies that we can use to help our classrooms become more collaborative and really support those outstanding projects that we would like to do. Now, when we talk about PBL culture, we need to understand just what really rich PBL is. This graphic is from PBL Works and the Buck Institute, and it outlines a couple of different key components that we really want to see if we're doing PBL well. Let's start over on the upper left where it talks about a challenging problem or question. We need to be inquiry-oriented in a PBL culture, and so starting off with a question that really drives kids is going to be a great foundation. We want our inquiry to be sustained. We don't just want this to be a one-day or one-class session kind of activity. We want to allow them to practice their persistence, develop their passion by working over the course of an extended period of time. It's important that PBL be authentic, connected to student interests, and also connected to the world outside the classroom. As we walk through a good PBL learning experience, we also need to make sure that our students have an opportunity to exercise their voice and to make some authentic choices. We also want to make sure that we have an opportunity for students to reflect, journal, talk to each other, and also to critique and revise the work that they've done. PBL can teach our students to think and act like engineers, and a huge part of that is the critique and revision process. And last but certainly not least, when we do PBL well, there's going to be a public product. Students are much more invested and much more engaged when they know that their work is going to be shared outside of the walls of the classroom. And also, we can drive home the idea that learning isn't just something you do so that you can pass a test. Learning is something that you do so that you can make the world a better place. So throughout our time together today, we want to think about those 7 key components, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 7 key components of PBL culture. So let's start off by talking about the warmth, the passion. We're going to dive into a couple different types of passion that you need to have in your classroom. As we go through our time today, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to throw some things out there. You don't necessarily need to respond to them. You can in the chat box, but I find that having some questions out there and some quotes just gives you an opportunity to reflect and to think about how to apply things to your situation. There's a great quote from Albert Einstein who said he had no special talent. He was only passionately curious. One of the greatest geniuses of our age or of all time, considered his most important characteristic to be passionate curiosity. And I think it's important that we be passionately curious about our content as well. There's a reason that you got into your subject area or that you decided to become a teacher and work in a school in the first place. There was something which really captured your imagination. There's one of the most famous mathematical equations, Euler's identity, that encapsulates some really beautiful principles and that mathematicians get really excited about. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're not a mathematician, but maybe you get excited about science, about the wonders and the vastness of the universe. That dot there is the Earth as viewed from deep outer space, just a mote of dust inside of a sunbeam. Every time I see that, I can't help but be filled by awe and wonder. And it helps me get inspired to teach my content. Maybe you're a social studies person. Maybe you love teaching about the big important movements throughout history and what they can teach us about being human. Maybe you want to explore the intersection of science and social studies and explore things like climate change and its impact on the world around us. Whatever it is, try to find what inspires you, what excites you. The question I want to reflect on is, what thrills you about the ideas that you teach? What thrills you about the ideas that you teach? When you find that passion for your content, you're at the foundation of a great learning experience. If you're not excited, they won't be excited, and so you need to start with that excitement. Another really important kind of passion that we all recognize is you need to have passion for your students. One outstanding way to show that, to communicate it with your kids, is to make sure to greet them every day. Give them a handshake, a hug, a high five, or a hygienic fist bump. Make eye contact, talk with them. Little things like that can communicate that you care. You need to get to know your students, and not just what they're interested in, but what their dreams are, what their wonderings are, and even what their fears are. You can get a lot of information about somebody by knowing what they wonder or what they're afraid of. Sometimes we don't dig that deep, but if you really want to show passion for your students, it's important to get to know them in a multi-dimensional way. And last, it's important that we show passion for our students by making their day, by believing in them, by trusting them to do the right thing, and to helping them to reach for big goals. In terms of making their day, I had a great suggestion from one of my colleagues who said that every day she would put 2 names on her calendar, and she would make it a point that at some point in time during that day, she would find those kids and do something that they would talk about at least that day and maybe for longer. She would go out of her way to make their day. And over the course of 15 days, she could hit every student in her class and help form that connection, help form that rapport. Those are things that are essential to a good PBL culture, to building that warmth, that passion for your students. So ask yourself, just reflect on that question. What can you do tomorrow to show your passion for your students? How can you show your passion for your students tomorrow? And if you get inspired, if you get a great idea, jot something down, write it down, and then put it into practice tomorrow. The same way we want our students to take their learning and put it into practice, we want to do that as professionals as well. Get inspired, get ideas, and then try them out. And the last kind of passion that I want to emphasize today is passion for your world. One of the things that we work on hard here at Van Andel is developing resources, Blue Apple projects, where students have an opportunity to make the world a better place, because we really believe that learning is more powerful when it's done for good. And for good, I don't mean forever, I mean for the betterment of the world around us. So there are lots of different ways that we can accomplish that we can explore that. But it's important when we develop our projects to reflect on and to think about different ways that your students can make the world a better place. This one might take a little more time. It might take a little bit more reflection. But I think that's a powerful question to ask ourselves. What can your students do this year? What can you accomplish before you send them on their way for the summer to make the world a better place? Maybe there's a cause they care about and you want to raise awareness, help them raise awareness of it. Maybe you want to do a fundraiser for something that your students are passionate about. Maybe there's something that they can create and share with others to brighten their day or to brighten their community. Or maybe there are opportunities for them to form relationships with people who need it, maybe senior citizens or veterans. Help your students develop relationships. That's a great way for them to make the world a better place. So when we think about establishing a culture that's really powerful for promoting good PBL experiences, the place we want to start is with that warmth, with that passion. second thing we want to focus on is failure. A good PBL classroom is going to be characterized by lots and lots of failure and by a certain attitude toward failure. The first thing that I think is really important when we think about creating a culture that embraces failure is that we admit it. Sometimes we emphasize positivity so much that we won't even say the word failure. We won't even say that something is a disaster. We treat it like Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. It's the thing which cannot be named. And when we refuse to name it, we build it up as this horrifying monster. One way that we can help students embrace and learn from failure is by not being afraid to say, well, I failed, or even, well, you failed, but that's great, because it gives an opportunity to learn from that. If we do that with a smile, if we do that and embrace it as a growth opportunity, naming failure, admitting failure is an important step to creating the correct culture in your classroom. Another thing we can do is just explicitly teach about why failure is important. We can talk about how if you remain in your comfort zone, no matter what you're doing, you're never going to experience growth. We can help students practice metacognition, thinking about whether they're in their comfort zone, their stretch or growth zone, or maybe they're in their panic zone where they just don't have any information to allow them to tackle a task or a problem. Helping students reflect on the way in which failure helps us grow can be really important. And we also can use models. You see some disembodied heads floating around in the green circle there. We can talk about people like Thomas Edison or J.K. Rowling or Michael Jordan, or perhaps yourself, and talk about the ways in which failure helped them to achieve the incredible things that they eventually were able to achieve. And we need to use failure in our classroom. If we want our students to see that failure is a growth opportunity, we have to put them in situations where they have to take on challenges and then fail to meet them and use that failure as a stepping stone to growth. I've put some strategies up there on the screen. Impossible is nothing is a strategy where you give students a challenge which is mathematically impossible, and then you tempt them to try to do it. By working against an impossible challenge, you ensure that there's going to be failure. And as they get better and better or closer and closer to it, you can help them see that running up against those obstacles is a great way to understand a concept more deeply and to promote growth. Keeping track of a mistake of the day is another way to really help your classroom become a fail-forward kind of place. Just keep a record. Have students be on the lookout for things that they've done that have not gone the way that they expected, and for ways in which those mistakes help promote their understanding. And of course, we want to be oriented toward growth and effort instead of just toward achievement. If we want to create a culture where we can embrace failure, we need to stop valuing achievement as highly as we value effort. Praise students for trying their best, for working hard, for being diligent, for overcoming their challenges, not for being smart or for being talented. So what there resonated with you, or did it help inspire you to come up with a different idea? How can we help our students learn to fail forward? What can we do in our classrooms tomorrow, or this week, or next week that could help our students learn to fail forward? Again, if you've got a great idea, jot it down. If we don't write things down, we tend to forget them. So take a moment and just brainstorm for yourself, what is it that you can do to really help your students fail forward? And the last characteristic of a really powerful PBL culture that I want to dive into today is sharing. We talked about how bacteria need nutrition in order to really thrive. The nutrition of PBL culture is the sharing of ideas. And we'll examine a couple of different dimensions in which that sharing takes place. First of all, we want to give a lot of opportunities for our students to connect with each other. There are all sorts of great ideas in our classroom, and we want those ideas to be able to bounce around and spread and to go viral. One outstanding strategy for doing that is think, pair, share, which most teachers have heard of and used before. And we sometimes think that just because it's done often means that it's not novel or sexy. But think, pair, share is one of maybe the best strategy for allowing students to do some individual reflection and then for allowing those ideas to be shared in a really rich and well-structured way. If you're doing a lot of think, pair, share in your PBL classroom, you're probably going to be providing them with the nutrition that they need in order for the ideas to really thrive. A similar strategy that I love to use in my classroom is using peer teaching. For a lot of concepts, you have a vanguard of students who grasp it in an early way, the early adapters. Now, I can continue to work with all the students who don't, or I can leverage the resource that I have at my disposal and take those students who understand it and help them articulate their understanding, help them deepen their understanding through articulation by pairing them up or putting them with small groups of other students and having them explain what they know and what they understand. Again, their understanding is deepened because you always learn best what you teach, and you're getting 5 or 6 or 10 little teachers in your classroom, and quite often they can teach it, better than we can, because they remember the process of learning it. And so be on the lookout for ways to establish connection between students and the sharing of ideas by using peer teaching. And the last one that I love to do in my classroom is to play truth contagion. Here's how that works. If we had a question and there were 4 or 5 or 6 different answers, we keep a tally mark of how many people voted for each of those answers. Then we'd allow students to wander around, to talk, to argue and debate with each other. And after that period of idea sharing, we'd come back together and we would see if the truth proliferated, if more students believed the correct answer than the incorrect answers. That's a great way for you to test out your PBL culture. If your students are really listening to other ideas, if they're really articulating themselves clearly, the truth has a way of outing. And so if you typically play truth contagion and find that more and more students believe something correct, that means that your classroom is practicing that connection in a rich and accurate way. So 3 great strategies for helping your students connect with each other and share ideas. And if you want your PBL culture to thrive, that connection is the fuel. But it's not just connecting with each other that we need to emphasize. Another powerful component of PBL culture is bringing the world to your students. We've got some great resources listed there where you have an opportunity for your students to connect with experts in whatever field you're studying. Skype a Scientist and Skype an Author are great resources, but we also live in a world where those experts have put their information out there in a lot of different contexts. Leveraging Google, leveraging the internet in order to bring expertise from the outside world into our classroom is an outstanding educational practice. Plus, if we want face-to-face connections, think creatively about leveraging the expertise of parents and other teachers. Finally, if you want to bring in community members, one thing that I discovered relatively recently is that if you just go out and ask, there are a lot of people who would love to swing by your classroom. A lot of people who are passionate about what they do and who would love to share about it and who enjoy interacting with curious students. So if you want to teach your students about economics, ask a small business person in your area. If you want them to learn about nutrition, go to a restaurant and see if one of the chefs would be willing to come to your class. This seems intimidating, it seems daunting, but what I've discovered is that people are excited to share what they love. So just ask. The last form of connection that I really want to emphasize today is bringing your students to the world. We talked about having a public product, and it's so important when we work on PBL that it's not just contained within our 4 walls. That students know that the work that they're going to do is going to be impactful, that it's going to get outside and affect the world in some way, in some positive way. There are 4 main ways in which students can have a positive impact on their world. One of those is by raising awareness about a cause that they care about. One of them is by raising money. That's a powerful, tangible way. Doing a fundraiser, organizing that, an outstanding learning experience, but it's also a great way for students to see that what they do matters. There's another really outstanding idea of creating something, maybe mosaics or murals that can be shared with others to help make the community a little bit brighter. And perhaps the most powerful one, the thing that we've discovered in building Blue Apple projects, is that building relationships, helping students to build relationships with people who are different than them and who might need a connection, that can be a life-changing experience for students. So as you think about how to form connections between your students and the world so that your students know that what they do has a real impact, think about raising awareness, raising money, maybe sharing a creation, or building relationships with people who need it. So as we think about sharing, take just a moment and think about what kind of connection you're excited to help your students make, maybe in the next week. What kind of connection are you excited to help your students make? So we've shared a lot of resources, a lot of ideas today. There they are organized in outline form. We talked about how the essence of PBL culture is closely analogous to the essence of bacterial culture. The same way we want bacterial culture to be warm and wet and nutritious, we want PBL culture to be passionate and full of failure and also full of sharing. We can explore how to accomplish each of those. Maybe our passion, we're going to put a strategy in place tomorrow to share our passion for our content, for our students, or for our world. When we think about failure, we want to think about strategies that we can put into place right away to help us admit it, to teach about it, and especially to use it to help students grow. And when we think about sharing, think about different strategies that you can put into place in your classroom right away to help connect students with each other, to bring the world to your students, or to bring your students to the world. As you look back on each of those different categories, I'm curious. In the chat box, comment, what are you excited of all the ideas that we've discussed, of all the resources or strategies we've talked about? What are you most excited to try in your classroom? All right, I'd like to thank all of you who were able to make it out today. I really appreciate you spending some of your time to reflect on and think about PBL culture and how to develop a PBL culture that allows your students really to thrive. As we developed Blue Apple projects, we took all of these things into consideration. So if you're looking for more resources, we'd certainly be happy to share some of those with you. And of course, we'd also like to continue the conversation. I've got my email listed there. You can like us and follow us on Facebook and Twitter because it's really important that we learn from each other as educators. There are a lot of great ideas there, and we want to make sure that we continue to share them the same way that you'd share in a positive PBL culture. That's it for me today. Thanks again, and I'm going to hand it back to Robin.